Imagine the historical public square. For centuries, it was governed by local geography and face-to-face interaction. Now, that space is buried under a global, instantaneous tidal wave of data. The digital landscape operates on entirely different rules. This chart shows the central paradox of our time. While the volume of available information is higher than at any point in history, our shared reality is fracturing. As the data grows, societal trust is collapsing. Freedom of speech functions as a society's primary error correction mechanism. It is the systematic process by which we expose abuses of power, test scientific claims, and identify collective mistakes before they harden into permanent policy. But this mechanism is failing. We are attempting to navigate a hyper-optimized algorithmic environment using evolutionary cognitive hardware designed to prioritize tribal survival over objective reality. This raises a difficult question. Can truth-seeking remain a passive default in this environment, or must it become a more deliberate, active defense against manipulation? To find the answer, we have to look at the specific psychological vulnerabilities that make even highly intelligent people easy to manipulate. We must examine the protocols required to actually think independently. Maintaining a democracy in the algorithmic age requires a change in how individual citizens evaluate what they see, hear, and share. In 1859, philosopher John Stuart Mill articulated the foundational defense of free expression. He argued that open speech is the only reliable, systematic mechanism for discovering the truth. Mill's argument rests on human fallibility. Because no individual or government possesses absolute certainty, the act of censoring a controversial idea carries the risk of censoring the truth itself. He also argued that even false ideas are valuable. For a truth to remain a living conviction, it must continuously collide with error and be forced to defend itself. Without this stress testing, certainty becomes a fragile illusion. History illustrates the cost of silence. In the early 17th century, the Catholic Church aggressively suppressed the heliocentric model of the universe, placing the works of Copernicus and Galileo on the index of forbidden books and delaying the acceptance of scientific reality for over 100 years. Conversely, when speech is protected, it serves as a weapon for marginalized groups. The American abolitionist movement relied on the mass distribution of anti-slavery literature to challenge the foundational myths of chattel slavery. The response from the powerful was immediate. In 1835, the U.S. government allowed Southern states to confiscate and burn anti-slavery mail, labeling it incendiary literature. Frederick Douglass argued that when rich and powerful men speak freely, while the poor and humble are silenced by force, the core crime of denying liberty is vastly aggravated. This leads to a foundational democratic principle. Defending a person's legal right to express an idea is a different act than agreeing with the content of that idea. When we conflate the two, we trigger the psychological fear of guilt by association. This fear drives self-censorship and creates pluralistic ignorance, where individuals pretend to align with a dominant ideology simply to avoid social sanction. When fear dictates the boundaries of discourse, the intellectual vitality of a society is hollowed out, leaving a consensus built on intimidation rather than genuine agreement. There is a common assumption that better education and more accurate data will naturally resolve our political disagreements. The data from social psychology proves the opposite. Research by Dan Kahan shows that as scientific literacy increases, polarization on controversial topics actually widens. The lines representing opposing political factions sharply diverge as people become more educated. This is identity-protective cognition. Individuals selectively credit or dismiss empirical evidence to support the pre-existing beliefs of their group. Contradictory evidence is processed not as a correction, but as an existential social threat. This behavior is rooted in our evolutionary history. Physical survival depended on remaining in good standing with the tribe. Intellectual independence was often a fatal luxury. High cognitive capacity simply provides intelligent individuals with superior tools to rationalize their pre-existing beliefs and counter-argue opposing data. This creates my-side bias. It acts as a cognitive filter, amplifying information that fits our worldview while blinding us to evidence that contradicts it. Intelligence is not a shield against propaganda. Without conscious discipline, a sharp mind is just a highly efficient tool for defending the tribe. Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations theory suggests that our moral judgments happen instantaneously as evolved gut intuitions. In this model, the rational brain acts like a lawyer seeking to justify the gut's initial reaction, rather than a judge seeking the truth. These intuitions are driven by 6 moral taste receptors: care, fairness, loyalty, authority, sanctity, and liberty. Political opponents emphasize different receptors, meaning they are often viewing the world through entirely different moral matrices. This disconnect is fueled by naive realism, the egocentric bias where we believe we perceive the world with perfect objectivity. We naturally assume that anyone who disagrees with us after seeing the real facts must be irrational or malicious. This creates effective polarization. Partisanship stops being about policy and becomes a social identity, where the other side is seen as a defective enemy. In 1919, Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. introduced the marketplace of ideas, arguing that the best test of truth is its power to get itself accepted in open competition. Holmes assumed a level playing field, but today the public square is mediated by proprietary algorithms. Technological gatekeepers now possess the power to promote or suppress information based on what generates the highest emotional engagement. Authoritarian powers have adapted to this with censorship by noise. They unleash coordinated troll armies to flood the zone with contradictory narratives, burying objective reality under an avalanche of distraction. This exploits the MAD model: motivation, attention, and design. Algorithms are engineered to amplify content that captures human attention by triggering moral outrage. This creates 2 distinct informational structures: epistemic bubbles and echo chambers. An epistemic bubble is mere ignorance. It pops the moment you are exposed to new evidence. But an echo chamber is a manipulative structure where outside voices are actively discredited. In an echo chamber, the presentation of counter-evidence is interpreted as an attack, which confirms the chamber's narrative and makes its walls thicker. In a curated feed optimized for moral contagion, truth does not automatically rise to the top. It is structurally disadvantaged against tribal validation. To survive this, we have to transition from a soldier mindset to a scout mindset. In the soldier mindset, beliefs are sacred territory to be fiercely defended. Reasoning becomes rationalizing, driven by a fear of social ostracization. In the scout mindset, the overriding motivation is to see things as they accurately are. The goal is to map the terrain with precision, even if the truth is socially inconvenient. This requires holding our identities lightly. We have to tie our self-worth to our commitment to objectivity, rather than our adherence to a political faction. This practice is called active open-minded thinking. It is the deliberate effort to search for evidence that conflicts with our initial assumptions. Cognitive resilience is an unnatural, daily discipline. It is the only way to prevent our intellectual faculties from being co-opted by tribal loyalties. Internal resilience is only half of the equation. A functional society also requires the ability to engage constructively with dissenting peers. We have to move past strawmanning, distorting an opponent's argument to make it easy to mock. We must practice steelmanning, the intellectually generous act of strengthening an opponent's argument to its most formidable version before attempting to engage with it. This is the core of Rappaport's rules. You must re-express your target's position so clearly they wish they had put it that way themselves. You must list points of agreement and mention what you have learned from them. Only then are you permitted to offer a rebuttal. This de-escalates the natural defensiveness of the soldier mindset. It transforms a disagreement from a gladiatorial conflict into a collaborative search for the truth. The ultimate metric of intellectual independence is the ideological Turing test. If you cannot parrot your opponent's arguments so convincingly that a true believer cannot distinguish you from a genuine adherent, you do not truly understand the debate. Freedom of expression, reasoned discourse, and critical thinking are the vital immune system of a democracy. They are the architects of social progress. The pursuit of truth remains a collective endeavor. It depends entirely on minds brave enough to think independently and hearts humble enough to admit when they are wrong.